We have a strategy of deterrence. That is to say, a capability between us all that will convince the Kremlin at all times that it cannot possibly be worth their while to attack us. They're stronger than we are, but it wouldn't be worth their while attacking us if the response was going to be so severe that they pay too high a price. NATO needs this weapon in order that the deterrent should be complete. Without it, there would be a gap. And a gap in the deterrent is dangerous. And NATO decided unanimously, and has never wavered from that decision, that unless there is a change of heart on the Russian side, we have to have these weapons.
If you were a Russian, what would your reaction be to the decision to deploy?
Whilst the politicians, mainly men, were arguing, a group of women, quietly, and then not so quietly, began a protest that lasted for 20 years. A protest against the employment of nuclear cruise missiles in Britain. It's now 40 years ago since that protest began, with a march from South Wales to Greenham Common in Berkshire, in the leafy heartland of home counties England, to where an American base was to house the cruise missiles. The story of the Greenham Common protests is a countercultural intersection, where movements such as C&D and suffrage, which predated the counterculture, mixed with the growing anti-nuclear movement, the women's movement, the green movement, and the peace movement, with all its social activism and protests of the 1970s and 80s. It's also a story where ancient British rights and principles of common land, that is land held collectively by and for the people, collided with heavy-handed central government and international Cold War politics. This is the Bureau of Cross Culture. I'm Stephen Coates. Four Corners Books have just published a rather wonderful collection. Women for Peace, Banners from Greenham Common. Banners that were made for the Greenham Common protests by those who protested. A celebration of the collective power of women in women's art and the history of peace campaigning. So I'm very pleased that at the Bureau for this episode, Women Against the Bomb, I have the author of that book, Charlotte Dew, who is a curator, researcher and writer specialising in 20th century and contemporary craft. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen.
And I'm very pleased that with Charlotte and I, we have Thalia Cambpell, banner maker and teacher, born 24th of August 1937, now 84 years old, and one of the founders of the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and on that original march. And of course, the artist and activist who made many of the banners that feature in Charlotte's book. Somebody who has integrated her political convictions and her artistic talents. Welcome, Thalia.
Thank you.
Thalia, Charlotte's book's come out. It's 40 years ago. It's like a bit of history. How does that feel looking back on it now? And, what effect did it have on you?
A bit strange, but Greenham totally changed me. I kept myself partially hidden because I was an artist and an activist and a feminist. And suddenly I sort of opened up and let my real self come out big and loud.
Right, but time's gone by, 40 years. I mean, your memories of that time and those events, are they still vivid for you?
I remember every minute of Greenham and the march, whereas my memory is going in other directions, but that is vivid.
Right, so the Greenham Common protest, they've sort of entered into countercultural history, but for people who don't know about it, and in fact how it all started, why don't you give us the background? How did you get involved and how did the march even begin in the first place?
Wales was threatened with the dumping of nuclear waste. Michael Heseltine announced in Parliament that Wales was going to dump it in 4 places in Wales. It was a good place to dump nuclear waste. And the community absolutely erupted, and the Welsh and the English came close. It was very heady. After 18 months we won, and Heseltine said Wales was not a suitable place to dump nuclear waste. That was very heady. That's when you win, it gives you a real lift.
Right, so it had been proposed that nuclear waste was going to be dumped in Wales, and that got a bunch of you, led by Anne Petit, the campaigner, to protest against it Michael Heseltine, the then minister in charge, kind of relented, it came back, but actually sort of spurred on by that, the success of that, you decided to take it further, right?
It was very exhausting, that campaign, but very exhilarating. And in a way, it was part of the cultural Cold War, me in particular, because I was an artist. People brought their talents to Greenham, but my talents were being an artist. And I couldn't stand abstract art. I always wanted to share my feelings and my beliefs in my art. No way did I want to pump up a paper bag, blow it up and hang it up on a bit of string. So it gave me a real focus for my art. Prior to that, I was painting and drawing and teaching. And then suddenly, banners honed into view.
We're going to talk a lot more about the banners with Charlotte too, actually. But for people who don't know anything about Greenham, what the name means, and those protests, just give us a bit of background to it. Why were you protesting?
Well, there were American cruise missiles being brought into our country, and people were concerned about it. We were concerned about nuclear waste, and we didn't want foreign nuclear weapons in our country, not under our control. And I think the nuclear waste thing got us going in Wales.
Right, and then Anne Petty had the idea for the march after that. 36 women, 4 men, aged between 25 and 80, and a few children, left Cardiff to walk 120 miles across country to Greenham Common. Tell us about that. When did you leave and when did you get there?
Set up on the 27th of August and arrived on the 5th of September. And by that time we were really close. I had my daughter 15 years old with me. She was a bit reluctant. She wanted to be riding a pony and going on the beach. But I think she looks back and she's quite proud now. It was just a very happy time, and all the people who supported us on the way fed us. And Anne Pettit did a wonderful job. We had speakers and entertainment and food.
And the place that you were heading for, Greenham Common, one of these common lands in Britain, which means even if there's technically an owner, it means that the common people, ordinary people, have got rights of access to it, to ride, to walk, to do other stuff, even to graze animals, etc. And that had been loaned to the Americans in World War II and never sort of come back into public access, and was now going to be the home for these 96 American Tomahawk cruise missiles, each one of which had the destructive power of 50,000 tons of TNT, 4 times that of the atomic bomb that obliterated Hiroshima, part of a European-wide NATO deployment of cruise missiles against the Soviet Union, basically. And so you guys are heading that way, and along the way, what sort of response were you getting from the people who were aware of the march?
Yeah, we had a lot of love and support on the way. And actually, I remember in one particular place, I think it was Marlborough, we always met in a circle. We never had rows. We decided we were going to be more communal, so we always put chairs in a circle and everybody went round and spoke. It wasn't like somebody out at the front speaking and everybody else listening. And a silver-haired councillor in Marlborough, he was in tears because obviously he'd lived through the 30s and he was crying. And he said, so good to see somebody else working for peace. And I mean, to make a county council, silver-haired county council, cry is quite an achievement.
Yeah, a British county council officer, especially in Marlborough, I mean, it is quite a conservative, traditional part of the country. So that's quite something, isn't it? And were you sort of attracting, more marchers joining you along the way?
Not till the camp got there. People used to, if we stopped in a town, people used to come out to meet us and then see us off, but they never actually joined the march. We were the same group all the way.
Right. So when you actually got there, you got to the American nuclear base in Greenham Common. How were you met, or how did the Americans respond?
It was quite low-key, really. We sat down and had a picnic, and the American commander came out. I didn't talk to him, but he sort of threw away, you can stay as long as you want, we don't mind,
So he was quite welcoming, not really realising what he was in for then.
You're rubbish, Morris, you can stay as long as you want, it won't affect us. Right,
there's no threat from this bunch of strange women and...
and babies and grannies.
Okay, so but you've done what you set out to do. You left South Wales, you've marched all the way, and you've got there. So what happens next?
Well, we had so little press coverage that we thought we had to do more. Anne Pettit was trying to get press coverage all the way. The one time the press found us was on the grass just before the Severn Bridge, because we were sometimes hosted in people's homes and we had to gather again. And we were all sitting in the grass in the sun. And the gutter press found us, and the Russian press found us, and the French press. And the French and the Russian press were asking really serious questions. I knew quite a lot about nuclear issues, but lots of women had just joined, they weren't particularly interested. And it was quite challenging. But the gutter press were trying to get, we had 4 teenage girls on the march. They were more concerned with getting photographs of the girls' legs and knickers than talking to us about anything or being abusive to us.
Yeah, well, business as usual for the press there. But you've arrived, you've set up this camp. I don't imagine you thought at the time it was going to go on for 20 years, right? And so what was the thinking behind setting up in the first place, and how did you come to involve your art through making banners?
It was a spontaneous decision, and I think that was when the seed for making banners was sown on that grassy bank, because I thought, if we're going to be slated, how do I fight the gutter crest? But I thought I'd fight them with beauty, satin and stitches, and seemed a bit strange, but it worked, I think. Because then we made postcards of all the banners. They went around the world, and then people wanted actual banners, so they went all around the world. And then they wanted me and the banners, and that went around the world. I was rather lucky. Lots of people made things on the fence at Greenham, and they were all wonderful and beautiful. But I was really passionate about history, politics, art, feminism. So all those coalesced into bright, shiny banners.
A perfect time to segue into Charlotte. Charlotte, Thalia there giving us some of the background to the Greenham protests 40 years ago now, so it's disappearing a bit into countercultural history. Why, apart from, the numerical anniversary, why do you think it was an important time to publish your book about the banners, including Thalia's work right now?
Been working on the book for quite a long time now, and I think it was great that we could release it for the 40th anniversary. But really, I've believed since I worked at the Women's Library and was cataloguing material connected to Greenham Common, how important the banners are within the history of banners more generally, but also within the history of women's campaigning. And I'm a really big fan of banners as examples of the sort of messages of campaigning. They're really the way that you can understand the basis on which campaigning is being undertaken. I really wanted to sort of dive into them and explore what the women were saying and why, but also how those banners were part of that protest.
Right, and for Thalia, they were part of a personal protest, weren't they? So of her own personal art translated into personal and then public protest. There's also sort of legacy aspects, isn't there? I mean, as somebody who's performed and curated many public events, however wonderful they are, there's always a little bit of sadness about the fact that they don't leave that much of a trace. I mean, everything's kind of filmed and videoed and recorded these days, but it's all kind of digital, whereas we don't leave so many artifacts behind often. And there is something rather wonderful about the fact that this coming together in terms of protest and social action and social activism, did leave behind these rather wonderful artifacts, because they're relics, but they're also memorials, aren't they?
They are. So at the time of the campaign, I think they serve a collective purpose. So quite often they are made by an individual, as you say, an artist, or made by a group, and it's a way of channeling the message. They create this artwork, and it can be done quickly and sort of amateurishly, but passionately, or it can be done very beautifully and in the way that Thalia works. very carefully designed and beautifully made. But whichever way, they have this sort of collective purpose to convey the message of the campaign. They sort of stand up above the crowd. They shout what the demand is, often quite playfully. They're designed to attract attention. And I think that you're right that things often don't survive, and even banners often don't survive because they are quite, they tend to be big, they get rolled up, they can get damp. So quite in the book, quite a lot of the banners we only know through photography of the time. Some, absolutely, you're right, do survive. But when you look at a picture of a campaign, and this is true of suffrage campaigning and CND campaigning from the past, even further back than that, when you're looking at Chartism and, the campaigning in the 19th century as well as the 20th century, the banners are what sort of stand out above the people, and it's how you understand what's going on. So they're very sort of potent, I think. And then in time, they become a sort of relic or a remembrance of what happened. They go through that transitional sort of process.
So they've got this rallying function, actually, as you're protesting. You can see them from quite a long way away. They've got this this function as kind of drawing attention from the media, and then they've got this function as a relic. The other thing for me, which is quite interesting with the banners, is that you've got this countercultural intersection of all sorts of stuff going on. You've got the women's movement, obviously. You've got the anti-nuclear campaigning going on, both of which is sort of predate, but also were very tied up with the kind of classic counterculture years in this country, sort of late 50s through to the 90s. And then you've got, with the banners, you've got I'm not sure if Thalia will be happy at this description, but you've got what I would call sort of outsider art. You've got kind of folk art, outsider art in a way. It's, artistic or artifacts which have been produced by artists, but they have a sort of, they're outside the kind of the art establishment, as it were. I suppose that's what I mean by when I say outsider art. So you've got all those things sort of coinciding, haven't you, in the banner?
You do. I mean, I think one of the things that Four Corners Books wants to do, who's published this particular book, is acknowledge these art forms and how important they are. So it's part of a series of books, they're called Irregulars, which delve into things which are creative and artistic, but actually not maybe part of that mainstream canon. I would very much argue for them to be part of the canon, to be an example of what's important to understanding a time. They are social history, they are art. As you say, they have these different functions and levels, and they are part of a continuum of that art form. So one of the things in the designs of Greenham banners that you can identify is that they were drawing from the language used, as you say, by the peace movements that predated them, all of the CND work that went on from the 50s onwards. They also draw from the women's liberation movement. You get the female symbol with the fist, which in itself drew from the civil rights movement iconography. And then you very much can identify a link to suffrage. And I think a lot of the Greenham women looked back to that as a source of inspiration. I know Thalia did. You can see that in the colours they choose to use. So you've got the colours of the Women's Social and Political Union, the purple, green and white. You also see it in the colours of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Society. You've got the red, green and white, and quotes from Sylvia Pankhurst on a banner. So there's a strong understanding and knowledge of what these women are part of, and that is female-led campaigning, and they adopt that language and they evolve it for the time in which they are protesting. Suffrage campaigning started in the 19th century. You have the Chartists, which is more of a male campaign, and then in the late 19th century, it's non-militant, it's non-violent protest. And then as you come into the 20th century, you get Emmeline Pankhurst and the Pankhursts at large, who argue that no change will be made without sort of interventions such as breaking windows and campaigning in a more violent way. So both of those strands of suffrage used banners, but they would have a number of different functions, just as the Greenham banners did. So they would be processed, they would, so in large rallies and that kind of thing, they would be on the stage behind speakers. They were made very professionally. And then, just like with Greenham, as well as the more professional and artistic banners, you get people locally making their own banners. So you get these two sort of types of banner, the sort of, they're very professionally made, and you also get the more amateur, but equally as impassioned. And that follows right through the 20th century.
Right. So we're going to come back to more of that a bit later. But in the meantime, Thalia, I'm going to return to you. We sort of left you there at the Greenham Common US Nuclear Air Base, and you and your friends, your tribe, have decided to set up this peace camp. What was it like? I mean, maybe you could just take us through sort of day-to-day life in the camp, where you made these wonderful banners.
Well, I used to go up and stay there for 3 or 4 days at a time regularly, because to make banners, I had to go home and be plugged into a sewing machine, working all day and night. But I needed to go up to refresh my enthusiasm and keep in touch. So I was up regularly for 4 or 5 times a day. It wasn't comfortable, but it's amazing how inventive women are and how cooperative most of them are. And we had tents, and Ian has stood for Parliament, and he had all the phone numbers of the Guardian and all the newspapers, so he got a bit in the newspapers.
Ian's your husband?
Yeah, I was teaching part-time at the University of Extramural Art, Aberystwyth University, so I was a bit pinned down. So they asked me to go up, but I couldn't go up. But Ian could, and he helped a lot setting the camp up. He got a standpipe for the water, and he went to see the head of the council in Newbury, and the head of the council said, "Oh, we don't mind you camping there as long as you obey all the rules and keep everything safe and clean and all safe. If you camp properly and don't break the law."
Right, so you've got some basic hygiene and sanitation and water facilities in place, and then presumably people come and go, do they, bring in food and supplies and whatever else you need?
Some people live there all the time, and some people visit for the day, and I went up for a few days because of my commitment to make banners. I couldn't do that at camp.
Right, so you're making the banners partly back in Wales and then coming up periodically. And then the following year, March 1982, there's the first of the blockades, where the activism takes a much more active route, and the police get involved. Maybe Newbury Council had been quite tolerant so far, but there's a lot more police action. 34 women arrested, and of course there's this tragic thing where Helen Thomas, a young woman, is killed in an accident with a vehicle, which must have been very shocking. And tell us about the thinking behind actually having the blockade.
When we got up there, first we thought we were being ignored, so we thought we had to stay, and then when we stayed we were being ignored, so we had to do a bit more. And I was on I think I was on the first blockade, and I wasn't very courageous at the time. Other women, we blocked the front gate. I sat on the grass at the edge, and then gradually as I got braver, I moved out and sat in the middle. So it took us time to get brave and imaginative and inventive, and it was a slow process.
Right, you're getting more active. Women are chaining themselves to the fence. There's more women coming. The media are getting more interested. Time's passing, and then the following year, there's a much, much bigger event, isn't there, where 30,000 women come to the base. Tell us about that.
Oh, those big gatherings were amazing. The sort of spirit they revised, and all being women together. I mean, I don't dislike men, but there is a great difference when there's all women together, because I remember when I first went up to Greenham, the press would come out, and the men, husbands, boyfriends, whatever, would say, "You go make the tea and I'll talk to the press." Really pissed us off, and that had to change. You go make the tea and we'll talk to the press.
So I'm going to put my hand up right now, Thalia. I'll make the tea. I'm a tea maker, happy tea maker.
So you can see the changes, how I sat on the edge of the blockade, moved out to the middle, and then we were told to go and make the tea while the men talked to the press about a women's march and a women's camp. So things changed in big ways and small ways.
Absolutely. Well, but 30,000 people, 30,000 women and some men gathering, that's an awful lot of people in the pre-internet age, pre-mobile phone age. How did you bring them all together? What was your sort of means of media connection?
Everybody went away and guaranteed to contact 10 more people, and each of the 10 contacted 10 more people. So it was word of mouth and like a chain letter. Even if we got vilified by the media, some people would love the vilification and others would be angry and come and join us. So the publicity we got, even though it was bad, it was still good.
Yeah, no such thing as bad publicity, as we know. But 30,000 people gathered together. What was that like? It
was wet, it was muddy, and we all brought things to put on the fence. I mean, I had made a banner by then. I think I'd started making, because I already had a Nuclear Free Wales banner from the Nuclear Free Wales campaign, so I took that one up and I'd made Remembrance is Not Enough with a view to the taking it to the Cenotaph that autumn, October, November. So I took up 2 or 3 banners which I'd made, and other people brought up everything that meant babies, booties, photographs of great-grandfathers killed in wars, their favourite dresses, their favourite tea services. So the whole fence was a mass of everything people loved and didn't want to lose in a nuclear war.
And this starts to work, right? Because, I mean, the images of this, of the fence and what you're doing, start to travel around the world. International media, people from around the world start to come and join you. Local media can't really ignore it anymore. And I'm sure there was sympathetic voices in the media, but you did also become the target of vilification, as you said. And what were the sort of things that were being said?
According to the media, we were filthy lesbians, bad mothers, dropouts, hippies, scroungers. The bad names they thought to call us were just amazing. And I'm very interested in history, and the suffragettes were called all the same things. So we got abused. The bigger we got, the more abuse we got. I was at the Blue Gate, and we blockaded the Blue Gate. We all lay in the road. And the police kept throwing us into the ditch and away, and we kept coming back. And that was very exhausting. The police were dripping sweat. As they picked us up, they were dripping sweat on us, because it went on from 6 a.m. till 4 p.m. And I wore a very loose coat deliberately. I didn't fasten it, so when they picked me up, my coat came off and they threw my coat into the distance, and all the women thought it was me flying through the air. And the police, actually, I talked to a young policeman. It was his first day in the job. And he said he so loved coming here, not football matches. It was wonderful. And, the police actually really enjoyed being there all night, talking to women in June with the moon and the flowers and the forest. And the police actually liked coming to Greenham. Where do you get a chance to be out all night with women?
Yeah, well, you can't blame him, really, can you? I mean, football matches, they can be quite blokey affairs, and at that time, I think they were still quite heavy duty, quite a lot of violence, so it probably was the preferred option for a young copper, or for some of them at least. Not for all of them. Obviously, you were having some quite unpleasant interactions with them and the authorities, local authorities, and of course the national authorities, the government, questions in Parliament, etc. It was all heating up a bit, particularly, of course, when you started to cut holes in the fence. It's almost like the damage aspect of it really got people going, didn't it? So were you doing that too? Was that one of your actions?
Oh yes, I did. I borrowed the wire cutters from a sculptor in North Wales. He's quite well known, and they were his grandfather's cutters that cut the barbed wire in the First World War. And the police took them off me, and I tried to get them back to return them, and they wouldn't give them back. So my cutters to cut the fence were cutters that had cut barbed wire in the First World War. And we cut, and it was quite spectacular. The police didn't know what to do, because there was us all cutting the fence down on the outside, and they were taking the cutters off us and throwing them. And we were Oh, and finally, we nearly cut down 7 miles of fence. And we were jumping up and down it like it was a trampoline. And they flew helicopters at us right low because we were standing on each other's shoulders cutting the fence, because the women at Greenham had been round, snipped the bottom, snipped the middle, but not snipped the top. So the fence was just hanging like a bit of washing. So all we had to do was climb on each other's shoulders, cut the top, and the whole fence came down.
Right, so you're breaking into the base. That was getting a lot of media attention, and then particularly this incident where women were dancing on the nuclear silos.
Oh, that was amazing. Yes. I mean, we got braver and braver with the things we did. I was in Oxford that night. I just didn't get down there. But it was really inspiring. And that photograph went all around everywhere, didn't it?
It did. And, the commander of the base, the American commander of the base, who maybe had, sort of welcomed you or tolerated you at the beginning as this kind of, harmless bunch of cranks, must have changed his mind by this time, of course. And what were the British government's response to this? Heseltine
or Thatcher would announce in Parliament that if we went into the base, we would be shot.
You'd be shot? What was the announcement in British Parliament?
Yes. Yeah. And it was a bit frightening, but we ignored it. And what would happen? The soldiers, British ones, would creep to a quiet part of the fence, meet a woman, give us their instructions for the day. We're not to set the dogs on you, we're not to hurt you. So in Parliament we were going to be shot. The people inside the base who'd just been briefed that morning, no, you're not going to be shot. And they also said, why don't you come in? This is 9 o'clock in the morning. Why don't you come in right now? We're really bored in here. Why don't you come in right now? They weren't inviting us in.
So not a very consistent response from the establishment then.
No.
But I mean, at the same time, I mean, sort of joking apart, that is very heavy, isn't it, to be implied that British citizens will be shot on British soil, over a protest. That is kind of very, very serious, right?
Yes, and I think they were quite concerned that the Americans might shoot us, because at one point at the Blue Gate, there was an American woman absolutely tooled up. She had everything. She lost it. And I thought, my God, the Americans could shoot us. There was quite some concern. And I did feel that day that woman might shoot one of us.
You mentioned then the Blue Gate, and that was one of the features of the camp. It was in fact lots of smaller camps around the base at the different gates, and they each had different colours and different characteristics, right?
Yeah, and what was so good, if you had religious people, political people, environmental people, heavy feminists, not such heavy feminists, so that 9 miles gave us all the space to be there and be ourselves, We stopped a lot of arguments. Because we could choose. I went to blue or orange. Orange was a sort of family gate when men were allowed in the day.
Let's talk about that. It was an initiative by women. It was a women's peace camp, a women's march. You mentioned before that Ian, your husband, was involved, and other men were. What was the policy, or was there a policy with regard to men's involvement?
We reached an arrangement in the end that men could come and visit during the day, but not stop overnight. And some of us were quite friendly to men and hospitable, make them a cup of tea, others not so friendly. And I remember making a cup of tea for a man who came to the base, and he was a supplier of fences for military bases. And he was really glad we were cutting it to pieces.
Well, you're generating new business put forward by the sounds of it.
And actually we found out the fence, the posts, this supplier of fences told me how thick the metal was, how strong the concrete was, how deep the foundations were, and we realised it was a rubbish fence.
Which is slightly worrying, considering it was surrounding some very, very potent, powerful nuclear weapons. Thalia, you've talked about, obviously with the press, as ever, left and right, there's some supporters and lots of vilification. But what was your relationship like with the locals? Newbury, which is the nearest big town, mentioned before, Berkshire's kind of posh, conservative part of England, really. So what did the locals think of you and all the things that you were up to?
They were pretty awful. We had a few absolute stalwart supporters who gave us baths and meals and looked after us. But The locals were pretty awful, actually. I mean, eggs were thrown at us. I don't know if they ever drove a car over the tent. I never saw that. But that was quite likely. You could be asleep in your tent at night and someone would drive a car over it.
Right, that's pretty heavy. But I mean, I read about a local group with a rather unfortunate acronym, RAGE, Residents Against Greenham Encampment, or possibly ratepayers against Greenham Encampment. Ratepayers meaning local taxpayers. And they were, very exercised by your presence there. But was that because they were a group of people who were sort of pro-nuclear deterrent, or was it all to do with the fact that you were actually camping in their nice leafy part of England?
What I saw, they didn't like the mess of the dirt. That was their excuse. They didn't like the mess of the dirt. And actually, we were quite clean. We had places to wash. We had shit pits, and we were well organised.
Yeah, nothing more offensive than your average rock festival in summer in the UK, right?
Probably better.
Okay, so it was a mixed bag, but they were generally against you being there, and of course they did manage to get you out, didn't they?
Oh, we were evicted twice. First in the local courts. I was banned from 3 counties. No, then in and then the bailiffs came round when I was up there, and I was so the court case in the High Court was Newbury District Council versus Thalia Cambpell, 17 others, and then there was a description of and any more. I can't. And we were tried in the High Court.
Right, there was evictions going on. There's some really quite nasty scenes, wasn't there, of women being dragged away, getting quite violent, and the judicial process being applied, but not very successfully. Maybe you can tell us about how that went. And
then what we did in London, there's a way you can apply to be joined. When some people are being prosecuted, you can say, I was there too. And so they were prosecuted, a lot of us.
And did anybody actually go to prison?
Oh, yeah, lots went to prison, yeah. And what they did was they educated the prisoners, gave the prisoners confidence. So in a way, it was very inconvenient to have Greenham women in prison because they were doing a great job on giving self-confidence to all the others.
So people are going to prison, there's regular evictions, and, what was happening when you were being evicted? You were just coming straight back?
Yes, yeah. In fact, we became very, very bold and imaginative. The court case, there was a lot of us, and first we went into a small court, and the judge asked 40 women to sit on 12 chairs. So 40 women attempted to sit on 12 chairs, and there was a heap of chairs and women all tangled up in the court, which he couldn't keep a straight face.
Yeah, the solemnity of the British court turning into farce. And of course, several judges, in fact, if they didn't even necessarily side with you, they declined to side with the government and enact what they were being asked to enact, and it didn't work.
We turned it all against them.
You turned it all against them, and the impact, the media impact was growing. People from all around the world coming, and of course, you ended up inspiring other peace camps, other peace protests around the world. And then come 1991, the cruise missiles are removed from the Greenham Common base. The camp itself carried on, and of course, the whole nuclear story carries on. But do you think that your actions in the camp and the protests, were instrumental in the removal of the cruise missiles at Greenham?
They might have gone anyway, but I think we certainly drew attention to them and made them think a bit more deeply about what was going on, and that the cruise missiles going over the plains of Europe, they'd had great difficulty in finding their way to Moscow because there were no mountains, no hills, and I think they weren't as useful as they made out to be.
Right, the missiles were gone, but the camp carried on. With you?
Well, I didn't carry on once the missiles had gone. That was my job done. And
why did it carry on?
It was regaining the common land, which I thought was great. Absolutely wonderful to regain the common land. Well, it was a military base. It took all the fences down, wild animals, wild plants. It was a common land. People could walk their dogs.
Right, so it's gone back to the way it was meant to be with access for the public.
Yeah, I haven't been up there since, but I hear it's very beautiful now, woods and flowers and trees.
Yeah, and there's a memorial to the peace camp there, and a memorial to Helen Thomas, the young woman who was killed there. Right, but the peace camp went on, and then your banners went on. Your banners, which is your artistic response to the whole thing, which you created. They went on and they've had this sort of remarkable life of their own prior to Charlotte's book. Tell us what happened.
Whilst Greenham was going on, I was also touring an exhibition called 100 Years of Women's Banners. I was setting Greenham in context, borrowing stuff from museums, borrowing stuff from local groups, and touring this great big exhibition through City Hall, City Art Galleries, city museums, and having celebrations. That was during Greenham, and it went on after Greenham. It went on from 1983. We were doing this big exhibition, and also keeping Greenham, going up to Greenham, and I also sent the banners abroad. So we made postcards, and we did, I made postcards for other people as well, but I made 89 postcards, 18,000 of some, 12,000 of others. And I sent the Greenham postcards all around the world, because in those days we didn't have the internet. So I went to Australia, New Zealand, America, Germany. And then the people who bought the postcards wanted to see the actual banners. So sometimes I air freighted them and posted them to those countries. And sometimes I went with them. My banners became like a magic carpet.
Charlotte, I mean, Thalia's banners are magical, wonderful things, aren't they? And hence, your book. It's not always the sort of thing that you think would make joyful things, is it, protest? But there's something sort of very celebratory about them. Do you think that they link in, in a perpendicular direction, as it were, with other things? Like, I was just thinking the HIV memorial quilts and stuff, where you've got that other kind of they're much more memorial quilts, obviously, aren't they? They weren't made as protests, but there is somehow there feels like they somehow part of a family. I'm not quite sure, a craft family somehow.
Yes.
A countercultural craft family. I mean, do you think so?
I would agree that there is a solidarity in making things together. So absolutely, that you can see the links with the HIV quilt. I mean, there's another project that links to it in a peace context, which is the peace ribbon, which was made in America, but other people contributed from around the world. And it was a particular size and shape of fabric made to tie to another piece of fabric, and then that was that went around government buildings in Washington. But I think we all, at some level, derive a benefit from making something, whether that's cooking, sewing, gardening. As we think about wellness and those types of things, there's a benefit to be derived. So when you're involved in a common cause, coming together to create something is about that bond of a shared passion, a shared ideal. And banners are a very natural thing to make in that way, or quilts or other things, because they come to symbolise what you all believe in. And I think it's a very positive thing for those who participate in it.
Recently, last year, a couple of years ago now, Extinction Rebellion did a takeover here at Soho Radio, and one of the great things about that is they occupied the building for, we're invited to occupy the building for a week or so, and one of the great things actually was that they were actually producing stuff in the room, screen printing T-shirts actually, and people could come in and actually do that with them here. And there was something about the making, actually, as you say, sort of doing it together, which is very sort of connecting, isn't it?
I think it absolutely is connecting. I think it physically and literally it connects you to the cause, because you produce something that then you can then wear or carry, which allows you to try and spread that message to other people. There's I like the fact that on some of Thalia's banners, she takes from suffrage banner designs the slogan "Join Us," and she took it, as I understand, literally to mean, join this cause, join this rally. But actually, it meant at the time, join universal suffrage. So there is a sort of sense of the importance of joining in and doing things together. The other thing is that when you're campaigning, if you're occupying land like the women were at Greenham, or indeed a building or wherever you are, although you're actively involved in doing something, there's probably also time, because you're there and you need to occupy yourself, and producing things that allow you to convey the message even further is a really productive way of spending that time. I mean, that's not to say it was always easy to make things at Greenham, because the women were living outdoors, the evictions were frequent, and it's very cold and wet, and at certain times. But that doesn't mean to say that there weren't times when women didn't come together to do that. Particular sort of creative activities happened around the Embrace the Base events, when thousands and thousands of women descended on Greenham and linked hounds around the whole scope of the air base, and attached creative things to the fence, which were designed and chosen to represent life. So the things that would be lost, if there was a nuclear bomb. And it's all about symbolism as well, symbolizing the message, the loss, what will happen if, these things are allowed to occur in the context of nuclear war, or, environmental loss. It's to get people to embrace the cause, you need to tell them why and how they can join in.
The cruise missiles left, so the protests were, contributed without any doubt, I'm sure, to that. But it's 40 years ago, and of course the spectre of nuclear weapons is raising its head again. But I mean, in terms of more recent protests, do you see there is a connection somewhere between what was happening at Greenham 40 years ago and stuff that might be happening now? Or as a sort of historian, do you see a connection between those things and the impact that Greenham had?
Yes. I mean, I think each campaign feeds into the next, because when you come to a campaign to understand that people in the past have fought for something and have affected change, is important in terms of your morale and wanting to do it, and also it helps you have a language for what you're doing, and in many ways a lot of the, I say at the beginning of the book that the Greenham banners can be read in a lot of different ways. This is about the history of women's campaigning. It's about the history of peace campaigning. It's about the history of banner design. So it's about the history of art, and in particular women's art. So it sort of acts as a stimulus for understanding, but also inspiring for the future. But I think that the world we live in is one in which all of the issues, particularly with peace and armament, are still pertinent today. I mean, as you say, they're slightly different. We're fighting against different things, but absolutely this push and pull against a world that involves war, that involves the production of weapons, is what the women didn't want at Greenham, and many, many people continue to fight for that now.
The book is terrific. I'm going to put a link obviously to that in the show notes, and so thank you for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And Thalia, when you witness young people today protesting, well, not just young people today protesting, whether it be Occupy or Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion, do you feel a connection with what you did?
Yes, I do. I follow it with great interest.
And how do you feel about when we read about Boris Johnson's plan to actually increase our nuclear capability again?
Absolutely. Oh, I can't describe. Sick and angry. Horrific. And he says they've got to be some of the small ones that he can use. I mean, that's almost worse than those cruise missiles coming to Greenham all those years ago.
Right, because the argument then was that actually it's a deterrent. Nobody's ever going to use these things. But if you're talking about small ones, tactical ones, they can be used.
Small ones that he can actually use. They never said that about cruise missiles, did they? So it's even worse.
Well, whatever happens next, looking back, 40 years into countercultural history, when all those countercultural things came together in the Greenham protests and the marches and the camps, I imagine you feel quite proud, do you, of what you did and, what just happened and, how it's represented and still kept in the banners?
Absolutely. And it was marvellous going on that march and seeing what it grew to be, from just 36 women and children and 4 men, I think. It was just amazing. I think Anne Pettit was inspired.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. We got there. So thank you so much, Thalia, for sharing your stories with the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you.
And thanks again to Charlotte. So, listener, I hope you enjoyed those stories too. You can check out Thalia's banners in Charlotte's book, Women for Peace, Banners from Greenham Common, published by Four Corners Books. I can put a link to that in the show notes. And I trust I will see you and hear you again next time when we hear more stories from the counterculture. You can check us out, of course, at bureauoflostculture.com and now on all major podcast providers. You can even leave us a review if you've enjoyed it. See you next time. I'm Stephen Coates. This was the Bureau of Lost Culture. We're going to end with some audio from Greenham Common days. Here is Thalia and her tribe singing Against the Bomb.